this is a response to Paradoxman, who I get the pleasure of watching your videos every morning, and thank you very much, sir, for doing that. Apologize for the cars passing. I'm just walking down a busy-ish road. So in particular, I'm going to address this video towards the video that you created a couple days ago about changes on the horizon, and James Rink's thoughts in general. So not only that documentary series, but some of the other stuff that he's been presenting. Because I went and watched a few other, well, just one other video by him after the documentary. And it's fascinating stuff. I was really quite enthralled with it. I hold with a lot of this stuff, as I think probably many of you do, that sort of speculative, rather that big question mark, right? How much of it is actually accurate? What kind of measures of proof can we use? As a philosopher, it's hard sometimes for me to digest, or at least I'm not a practicing philosopher, but I was trained in philosophy. So like, when he says something like, Reagan was shot and then cloned, that's a hard thing for a person that wants the truth to really hold very much weight with, I think, unless he backs it up. And he doesn't, some of those things he makes statements that he doesn't back up that much, but I have researched the banking elements, and he at least from the level that I've researched it, seems to be quite accurate and lay a really clear route to better understanding, again with very little evidence for, but still a very clear picture of it. And then there's parts of it that, if it's true about the banking system, I didn't know that, stuff like the levels of the accounts, I didn't have any clue about that sort of thing, despite the research that I've done, and it's been somewhat extensive, but not radically so. So I'm very, very open to not having all that information, and quite certain that I don't, but it's interesting take on some of that stuff. In relation to your videos / his videos, as you're presenting this notion that we're entering into the ninth wave, I've also been very fascinated in developmental psychology, and there's this relationship, arguably, between one theory called spiral dynamics and what you're saying here with this sort of ninth wave notion. Now, spiral dynamics starts really about 100,000 years ago with sort of survivalistic mind, and it's sort of euphoric. It's not the individual is not yet an individual per se in this theory, but there's enough mind there to be considered a mental being, arguably. At least that's what spiral dynamics is presenting. So you kind of have the fire makers, the tool makers, and then you get like the kind of early animistic, magical thinkers, and then you get sort of egoic pyramid makers, about 10, 20,000 years ago kind of thing, 15,000 years ago, and then you get sort of the great religious thinkers, the religious traditions that come online. It's the fourth stage. The fifth stage is sort of the rationalist stage. You see the early goings of it in sort of Greek culture. The sixth stage is sort of pluralism, which you see sort of the early goings of in maybe Hegel, with dialectics, and then sort of blossoming in the postmodern revolution in the 60s. And then the seventh stage is sort of an integrative stage, which really maybe only came online with people like Aurobindo in the 20s and 30s, Gebser, and around that period. But it hasn't even really blossomed yet in our culture. It's just arguably on the edge stage of doing that. And then the eighth stage is sort of turquoise, which is holistic. Um, it's in lots of regards being still quite primitive. So there's not that much to really uh, concretize exactly what it is, but it has this kind of subtle energy kind of element to it, that sort of thing. The ninth stage would be a mimic of the third stage, as the first was to the seventh. So with the integral stage, for example, um, you see a similarity with the first stage. It's kind of chaotic. And there's an element of survivalism in there, and the eighth one has a parallel with the magical thinking, arguably, if this theory is correct. And so, like the animistic, by magical, it's like where a child could put on a mask and think that they've taken on the persona or characteristics of that animal. But sort of the third stage was that egoism, where you now have you now regulate thoughts, feelings, and emotions, but you can't really take the perspective of other yet. So there's this ability to, for example, murder somebody and not feel remorse for it at that young age, or in culturally or historically. Arguably might see that in things like Mayan culture, where they chop the heads off of other humans, and it's just a ritualistic act. So there might be this sort of parallel here between the third stage and the ninth, and that's what John Beck, the progenitor of this theory, is presenting. And so, if that's the case, then you have maybe people like James Rink, who's in his other videos saying he's sort of like a super soldier, where through a lot of chemical understanding and a lot of scientific and data, you can divide the mind up and do these things. Now, on the flip side, it could be a highly compassionate transcendence of the individuated will. Now, I don't know which it would really be presented as, but there's this weird kind of, arguably, if you're right about the science wave, kind of coming together of these different forces, where we're laying down the framework for sort of what might be considered superhuman beings that have, in many regards, transcended the individuated mind, or something like this, and are linked up through, as James presents it, sort of this AI database, which isn't, so like, if you take things like telepathy even somewhat seriously, the internet isn't that different, arguably, from these sorts of things where we're transferring information via wireless internet, and if our minds are capable of something similar, then you can have a sort of global mental deregulated intelligence, or swarm intelligence. Anyways, this is getting kind of speculative. I'll leave it there. But be well. Hope it's somewhat interesting.